Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is Jeff Jones, and with me today is the panel, and we'll right from the top and introduce everybody. Hey, Dr. Silkman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Jeff, and it's great to be here. A big hello to all my fellow panel members, and a big hello to everyone in chat. Thank you.
Yeah, hello to everyone in chat. That's a good point, Dr. Silkman. Hope everybody has been enjoying the ride as much as we have, and really appreciate your continued support. How are you doing this morning, Cal?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back. Hello to the panel and to everyone in chat. And I'm ready to start episode 3. On to the next.
On to the next. I think I'm going to call my production company On to the Next Productions, Big Jeff. How are you doing there, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's getting really cold here in New England, as I'm sure it is in Michigan. So let's warm up by firing up Kratz a little bit.
Well, I will have to admit that for the first time in months and months, my feet were a little cold today out here in Hawaii on my way to the golf course. So I totally feel you. That cold weather is really kicking in.
You deserve a lot of sympathy for that.
Jack, how are things in Michigan, buddy?
Well, I'm going to say that it's probably a lot colder than it is in Hawaii. I'm guessing, my sentiment. I kind of had the sentiment like Big Jeff. I felt a little sarcasm there. I mean it in the best possible way, though. I'm glad it's you can enjoy that warm weather. But hey, hello to all my panel members, and hello to everyone in the chat. So yeah, let's get to it.
One of the things that's hard doing this kind of work is that you know that you're causing a lot of pain to the victim's family. People want certainty, they want resolution, and they like to feel like the person is being held accountable. And then somebody like me comes along and they start reading these things, like, well, maybe it isn't so certain. And so they can focus a lot of their animosity towards me.
Kathleen Zellner, she has a lot of people working on Stephen's case, and she may think that he's honestly innocent. But if this wasn't a high-profile case, I highly doubt if she would be working on it.
Kathleen Zellner is using Twitter to defend Avery's innocence, announcing to her followers that she won't quit until he's out.
And you really need to use Twitter to try to get a guy out of jail. I mean, it's probably a new way to do it. And she's not a dumb lady. She knows what she's doing. She's smart.
Kathleen Zellner tweeting she visited her client and reviewed his 38 boxes of files, adding he remains innocent and framed.
If she's just trying to find a loophole in the system, then and Stephen may still have done it, but she thinks that she can get him out because of a technicality or something like that. I don't think that's right, obviously.
Look, let's think about it. Every time there's an exoneration and the person who's been incarcerated for a long period of time has actually been found to be innocent, it is going to cause a domino effect, right? Because when Stephen was exonerated in 2003, when the state had informed Penny Bernstein that it wasn't Stephen Avery who had sexually assaulted her on that beach that day, was actually Gregory Allen, she fell into a real deep depression. So, it's a tough one because you want true justice. You want to make sure that the right person is in prison or right people are in prison for the crimes that have been committed. It's always going to have a flow-on effect, but we mustn't forget there are people sitting in prison who are totally innocent, right? And Kathleen Zellner had made the statement, remember? She's never going to defend someone who she believes is guilty. And if you remember, she defended that the German serial killer, and she was trying to get him off on technicality. And she knew that he had committed all these murders. And in the end, he passed away and he confessed to all the crimes. So it is a tough one. But, you know, at the end of the day, guys, if you're innocent, you don't belong in prison.
One thing to add to that, he's bitching about her using the media, but let's be clear about what the state did. And they really used the media, and they were glad to line up at their cash register and keep pumping these stories out. And we have, N64 has collected a huge amount of the media stories, and there are only a small amount. A lot of them, when we first started trying to get these back in 2016, there were a lot more, but these various news organizations pull them down. So there are a lot that we don't have. I think it's just hypocritical of what he said.
There's a couple of things that for me that kind of jump out. One is like, yeah, times have changed a lot even since this has come out, because, you know, maybe someone would say, oh, you would post about the case on Twitter. Now it seems like it would be strange if you didn't post on Twitter about the case. Like, I think times have just changed a little bit. And the only other thing is that, you know, in all of the researching I've ever seen, the only time I've ever seen this gentleman that she was friends with, you know, in context is in this documentary. His name doesn't come up in other research. I don't see his name coming up in other. And so just because we're putting context in it, I think that needs to be brought up. That I don't know. I mean, yes, I'm not saying that he wasn't friends with Teresa Halbach, but he's not mentioned as one of the best friends. He's not mentioned and so this is just one man's take. It's just one man's interpretation of it. And I guess he's like representing the family in a way for somehow that side of it. I don't want it to be like a side, this side, that side kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's just important to point those kind of things out about this guy.
I think that's exactly right. He was willing to come on and say, well, she's going and using the media. Who uses Twitter? Well, okay. What about this press conference that Kratz did on March 2nd, 2006, knowing that it was so prejudicial to absolutely destroy the jury base? He knew that, and so did the rest of them, and he was allowed to get away with it. That's the reason prosecutors do not do what Kratz did.
I don't think anybody needs to worry about a technicality. Courts at this level aren't letting people out on technicalities. I would say to the people on the Avery case, if this case is solid, if he's guilty, I'll fail. So there's nothing to worry about. But if it's not solid and someone else did it, then I'm going to overturn it. And that's going to come out. And that's also something to be glad about, that our system of justice allows for that.
I usually meet up with Barb and Scott at about 7. I'm sure if I'm a couple minutes late, she ain't gonna say anything. But we just got a routine, you know. So I always like to be a little earlier and, you know, catch up with the dogs, and, you know. That dog that she's got for Brendan is really nice, by the way. Yeah. We all ride together. We'd use my vehicle, but if I don't trust it, there's some issues I gotta fix. So I pitch in for gas. It'll be a wonderful visit, I'm sure. You know, we always have good times. You know, I just wish it was longer. Morning. How you doing today? Good. All right. Awesome. Nice to see you.
Whenever.
I'm ready.
So did you want to go with us next Sunday too?
If nobody else is going with you, that wouldn't be a problem. You know, because I know once in a while you bring Blaine and his wife, and You know, and I deeply understand, you know.
There's plenty of room.
Okay. Yeah, sure. No problem.
Have a great visit. Tell Brennan to hang in there, and we are praying for him, sending lots of love his way. 242 likes.
Yeah, his face lights up with all the supporters because he didn't think you'd have that many. I says, Brendan, there's still a lot of good in the world. You always hear about the bad. You know, but there's a lot of good things that happen too, you know.
We support Brendan and all the wrongful convicted. May justice prevail.
You got to wait till they open the door and they let us in. Walk through a metal detector. There's another door that they have to open up. Bring the form to the desk. They tell us what table to sit at. Sometimes we have to wait to see him. He walks through his door. He'll give Barb a big hug and Scott and then me. I'll give Brendan a burger. Barb will get him a soda. We share, you know, she'll get him this, I'll get him that.
I bet you we visited him 1,000 times, if not more, in the last 11 years.
The worst thing about it is leaving him behind.
Yeah.
His brothers would go out more by him,
It hurts.
but it hurts him too much.
His oldest brother's he's just torn apart. He wants to go see him, but he's afraid to go see him.
It hurts Bobby too, but he's also got a son that he's got to take care of now.
No, Brian's got a son too that he's got to worry about protect. But 11 years later, and it's still got a major effect on his oldest brother. If he'd go see him more, it'd get easier like it has for us.
I mean, even when I'm at work and something pops up in my head, I start crying. Even to this day.
Once somebody's convicted, they have to move mountains to get out of prison. Our task now is to end an entire system which by design is now weighted in favor of the prosecutors, in favor of the state, in favor of keeping this conviction in place. Courts govern themselves by the principle of finality. The courts don't want to be flooded by applications from inmate after inmate seeking to get released from prison. This concept of finality can govern everything that happens post-conviction.
It used to be that the federal court did not place as much weight on this concept of finality. And then in 1996, the US Congress really tied the hands of federal court judges in the ways in which they're allowed to review state court decisions. The statute is known as EDPA, A-E-D-P-A, which is the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act. The anti-terrorism part of the statute is in direct response to the Oklahoma City bombing and the belief on the part of politicians that Timothy McVeigh should be given the death penalty and that federal courts should not delay his execution.
There has been a massive explosion at a federal building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. It happened just a short time ago. A large portion of that building has collapsed and fallen.
There are reports that at least 250 people are missing.
There were 40 children inside because of the daycare center on the second floor.
This is the deadliest terror attack on U.S. soil ever.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an act of cowardice, and it was evil. Let there be no room for doubt. We will find the people who did this. When we do, justice will be swift, certain, and severe.
There's apparently a confusion over whether you're for or against an amendment regarding habeas corpus.
Well, yeah, we've been trying to pass, and I tried to pass last year and failed to do it, a bill which would reform the habeas corpus procedure, or the criminal appeals procedure.
So,
in death penalty cases, it normally takes 8 years to exhaust the appeals. It's ridiculous. And if you have multiple convictions, it could take even longer. We need to cut the time delay on the appeals dramatically.
The families of the victims of those people who have lost loved ones, colleagues, and friends to acts of terrorism came to us and says, give us justice. Give us habeas and death penalty reform.
Why is it necessary to link the death penalty and the constitutional guarantees of habeas corpus to a terrorism bill? This is just a political deal.
The absurdity, the obscenity of 17 years from the time a person has been sentenced till that sentence is carried out through endless appeals up and down the state court system, up and down the federal court.
I think it's a really good. I just want to say, because this guy said 17 years, and I thought there's a good spot to stop, because he's saying that, you know, a death row inmate, you know, would be 17 years of appeals before they actually get to execute him. But how long does it take to overturn a wrongful conviction? It's like 15, 20, sometimes 30 years, right? And I think that just struck out at me. But Jack, it looks like you might have something to say on this. You've been holding.
Well, I do, because the senator right before this one, the Kennedy guy, he asked the correct question. Why does this have to be tied to an anti-terrorism bill? It's a separate issue, and that they completely knotted it up into this bullshit that is it needs reform. At minimum, it needs reform and amended or done away with and rewritten. I don't have a problem with really bad people facing the worst justice. At the same time, now you've lumped in other people to these really bad people, and it limits the federal ability to make correction to poor state decisions. And yeah, I hate it. It's the worst legislation we've ever had. The worst.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jack. It seems like whenever we try and make a snap piece of legislation in response to anything, you know, just to score political points, it just fails miserably, and you know, it's just. It just ends up getting used in places where it should not be getting used.
Court system makes a mockery of the law. Only 100 out of 10,000 habeas corpus issues come from death penalty cases. Even less come from terrorist cases. Yet this bill is not limited either to death penalty cases or to terrorist cases. It is depriving every single American, every single child, every single one of us of our constitutional protections of habeas corpus.
I'm obviously not from America, and I don't really understand all the intricacies of these particular laws. But to me, it goes to emphasize a very important point. and that is to make sure that your court case goes right the first time round. Right, guys? You want to make sure that you have the very, very best defense. You obviously must have deep pockets, and potentially you must recruit the very best forensic experts or experts to help in your case. Because, as we've seen in many outcomes, if things go wrong, you're in deep trouble. And Kathleen Zellner and other attorneys have said that, potentially to free someone who's been convicted and they're innocent could take up to 15 to 20 years. And now with all these particular laws, I see them as being burdensome. And it goes to show that it's very, very rare if a judge gives you habeas corpus relief. Just think about that in the future episodes coming up.
That's exactly what it comes down to, Doc. You get basically one real shot at a bite of the apple, and it's so skewed towards the state now. They have more money, they have more experts. Look at what happened in this case alone: 2.5, 2.6 million, and there's so many hands in that pie pulling money out for all this different crazy shit, and that's including the experts. Eisenberg, Cole Haynes, she got her slice of the pie. New camera systems. The amount of overtime was insane for some of these people. I'm sure they made well in excess of 100,000 plus, maybe even more than that. We don't know, but the point being is that when you are forced down this narrow hallway now, which is what EDTA did, you're forced down this narrow hallway, and if you don't have money or you don't have we can only think of a few really good public defenders, people who would take these cases pro bono that are really fucking good. You're screwed. You can be potentially screwed for life.
Correct. And, it all comes down to one thing, a protection of the verdict. And the state will do anything to protect the verdicts. And I believe Kelly made the point at some stage previously, for Kathleen Zellner and also for Stephen and Brendan, the bar is set extraordinarily high, because think about the consequences if both Stephen and or Brendan are released. It means that a lot of people are going to be doing a lot of soul searching if errors were made along the way. So the state is going to raise the bar extremely high.
I'm glad you said that, Dr. Silkman. And the other thing I just wanted to say, it is the system is a double-ended sword, because we do have the innocent people that fall into these cracks. And you're right, it's to protect the verdict, and you need to get it right the first time. Otherwise, once you're locked in, you're locked in. But that's what the system's for. The system was designed to actually put away the real dangerous people of society, the real criminals. And we are glad that it does uphold a tight and hard bar, because we don't want them kind of people getting out on technicalities, getting out because their defense won in the courtroom, and then be amongst us and hurt our loved ones or ourselves. So it is, although we are seeing it from the glass is half full, there's always the glass is half empty, and that is the system does do its job when it's meant to as well. And that's to keep us protected from the bad son of a bitches.
Yeah, the checks and balances, which we've talked about this before, and the system being only as good as the people that are in place at any given time. We've seen this throughout history, or a recent history, where a lot of, civil liberties are protected, yet at the same time, the bad guy gets put away. They get their day in court. The state proves, and all the evidence is presented fairly. You get a good judge. You get an honest prosecutor. You get a decent defense attorney. Everybody has a chance to put on their side. Prosecutor doesn't withhold. The cops plant evidence. So you have all these other factors that come into play, and the players along with it. If everybody's playing like they should, even in the adversarial nature of our system. The system is good and it works. The problem is when you inject these shitty people into it that affect they're going to affect the outcome. And this is on full display in these two cases.
I agree, Jack 61. I just want to make the comment that, you are correct. If you're a prosecuting attorney, your job is to prosecute and put people away, potentially put people away for life in prison. You're not going to get a very good reputation if you're a prosecuting attorney and you keep on losing cases. So, this is personality driven as well. And remember, Ken Kratz kept on saying that Stephen Avery, he was a cult hero. He had hero status amongst the community, et cetera, and this was going to be the biggest case in Wisconsin. And let me tell you right now, as we all know, they took out the big guns. Right? There were 3 prosecuting attorneys, not only for Stephen, against Stephen, but also against Brendan. So, they put out all measures, all stop. They spent a fortune in order to convict Stephen and Brendan.
I don't see any reason where if someone is in prison and they have a piece of forensic evidence that they would like to test, how come, and they're going to pay for it, how come that test isn't immediately granted? I just don't see any reason why anyone who is sitting, says I've been wrongfully convicted and testing this item may help prove my innocence. But they shouldn't be granted immediate access to that, especially if they're going to pay for it.
That's 100% correct, Big Jeff. And we know of many court cases whereby DNA samples haven't been tested. And not only that, but the prosecuting attorney refuses to allow even the testing of specific forensic DNA samples. And what we see in this case here is that Kathleen Zellner has exposed just how badly the forensic analysis in the Stephen Avery case has been done. There are many additional samples that could be tested, but my understanding is that the majority of them now are procedurally barred. The state don't want to give Kathleen Zellner and her experts the opportunity to test further forensic samples that may give a different picture or a different outcome. And guys, we don't have to go any further, right? Right, Jack 61, how the state gave away the cremains. Back to the Horbach family.
That's right. Blunt and bloody instrument, gone, disappeared,
Correct.
Which could have been key to this case and probably was gone.
The RAV4 item CX A23 fingerprints not run through databases. Yeah, it's shocking what the state is allowed to get away with. How is that even possible in the United States of America? That potential exculpatory evidence can't be run. It's shameful.
See, you can clearly see what's happened here. The guilters make a case. Hey, look, all the forensic evidence is pointing towards Stephen, right? Unfortunately, the state is also suppressing forensic evidence that may potentially point to somebody else. So again, what it is, it's very simple. It's controlling the narrative, controlling the outcome of the story. So hence, anything that's pointing to somebody else or potentially another scenario, you want to make sure that you block it, suppress it, and you can never test it. Otherwise, you may get answers that you don't really want.
Okay, so I'm going to take this moment and opportunity. I have a little bit of a back and forth through emails with the Center of Integrity in Forensic Sciences. I've done some interviews with people from this organization before. And so I just want to take the opportunity to share my screen just really quickly. They sent me an email and they asked if I would please focus on them for Giving Tuesday, which is November 29th, 2022. And if you care about what we're talking about right now, guys, and you really want to make a difference, these people will help explain it to you. These people are actively working at this to fix these problems. Giving Tuesday, which is November 29th, if you guys are so inclined. But these people are doing real work.
Yeah, definitely donate to them. They are the real deal.
And there's no question about it. And we all know the story, right, guys? Where Buting and Strang wanted to go inside the Wisconsin State Crime Lab to observe Cherie Cohane do forensic analysis to make sure that everything was done correctly. And they were reminded that they could not enter into the laboratory for fear of contamination. All right, Jack 61, right, guys on the panel. And we all know what happened, right? Cherie Cohane contaminated her own samples.
That's right.
It goes to show that in cases like this, where there are no eyewitnesses, unless you believe Brendan Dassey's story, which has got more holes than Swiss cheese. In cases like this, where there are no eyewitnesses to the actual murder of Teresa Halbach, as far as we are aware, these cases are reliant on testing, forensic testing, right? These are circumstantial cases, which means that absolutely you got to guarantee fair and professional testing of all the forensic samples, right? No bias at all. However, guys, even though we're going to talk about it later on, we all know what happened in the Stephen Avery case and who put her hand up and wanted to be front and center in the forensic analysis of all the samples, right? So where's the fairness, guys? There's the lack of bias?
This statute placed strict timelines on people seeking review of their sentences and applied more broadly to cases that didn't involve death sentences.
America will never surrender to terror.
President Clinton said his intention was not to constrain federal courts in their ability to review constitutional violations. But the Supreme Court, in its interpretation of the language of the statute, has imposed greater and greater restrictions on judges' ability to review state court decisions.
Because of EDTA, we have to show the federal court that when we told the state courts that the Constitution was violated, and they disagreed with us, that the state court was not just wrong. The state court didn't just make a mistake. It made an unreasonable mistake.
You have to thread the eye of a needle in order to get relief in federal court. 99% or even more of federal habeas petitions are denied. Winning in federal court is the equivalent of a legal miracle.
I just wanted to bring up the fact that that's the second person now that's mentioned in this case that knocking on the federal door is like a needle in a haystack finding it. It is so hard that it's a door that you only knock on basically when there's no other doors available. And, you know, we've heard, a lot of us have questioned, why didn't Kathleen just bite the bullet and go and just knock and see what happens? Because she's getting knocked down every step of the way on all the other courts. But I think it's the, what's the word? It's that finality of it. Once you get there and once you go through it, there really is no coming back. It's so final. It's so concrete that it's like, it would be a heavy burden to put that stigma over your case once that denial came in, if you got denied out.
To this day, of course, Dassey's saying he didn't do it. And perhaps he'll win his federal habeas appeal, but I wouldn't count on it.
You know, when you consider that Kaczynski was meant to be working for Brendan Dassey, not against him, and the mere fact that he made that negative comment, I really think that it reflects his sentimentality all along, as in, good luck, kid, you're going to need it. Rather than, oh, well, there's always some hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And it just goes to show his pessimistic attitude right from day one. And it goes to show, and I'm sure the panel members and people in chat will agree, that you got to get everything right from the start, because once mistakes are made, they're very, very hard to patch up and correct.
Situation, I would say that for all practical purposes, his case is over. So I don't think there was any loyalty to attempting to persuade him that he wasn't going to succeed at trial, and the best thing for him to do was probably to try to strike a deal with the state. Confession, of course, is valid. Most likely, had he cooperated and chosen to testify against Avery, he could have reduced his time probably in half.
I just think it's startling to think about it, but that just screams how innocent he is. He's not going to go and say a bunch of wrong stuff and testify against Stephen Avery, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And Mr. Kratz, Fallon, and Gunn, they knew that too. So they knew that they were all walking on a tightrope. So hence, that's why they had to come up with two different trials, two different murder scenarios on the same victim, right? Because they knew that had the state called up Brendan in Stephen's trial, it would have been a shit show, right? He would have got up on the stand, he would have recanted, said, look, none of this happened, guys. I was coerced by the cops. All hell would have broken loose. So they had to basically insulate Brendan away from Stephen. And they had to try Stephen on the forensic evidence. And guys, we know that the forensic evidence was quite damaging towards Stephen. You had to basically explain how Stephen's blood got in the RAV4. Hence, because his defense team couldn't point to anybody else as a third-party Denny, they had to go with a blood planting scenario from the blood vial, right? And in the end, that didn't really work well, right? So, getting back to what we were talking about, you want your lawyer, your attorney, to work for you, not against you.
For Brendan to make a plea deal for something he didn't do? Would you think that would be right? I don't think so. I don't think that would be right at all.
No.
Especially if you're innocent. He told me he was innocent. I said, stick with your guns then. It's about the truth.
Brendan Dassey, Dassey.
I actually have to disagree with Barb. As much as I respect Barb, it's not about the truth. It's about process, right? Because if it was about the truth, neither Stephen or Brendan will be in prison now, right? Especially Brendan, right? When you look at things in a logical, clear light of day, right? Because there was no forensic evidence against Brendan Dassey at all. There was nothing to tie him to Teresa Halbach or any of the crime scenes. He's in prison because of what he said and how he was coerced. It's got nothing to do with the truth. It's about process. And as we know, guys, especially in the American system, a lot of trials, a lot of cases never make it to trial because of plea bargaining. So in effect, it's like this. If you're innocent and you say, look, I want to go to trial, and the judge will say, look, if they find you guilty, you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. If you do a plea deal, you can spend 10 years in prison. Which one do you want to go for? So a lot of cases, a lot of people will plead guilty because they don't want to have the risk of spending the rest of their time in prison for the rest of their life. And remember what happened with Stephen in the 1985 case? Every time he was asked about, hey, look, just plead guilty, and you'll get parole. And he said, no, I'm not going to plead for something I didn't do. He stuck to his guns. By a miracle of God, he got exonerated. But guys, to tell you the truth, I don't see this happening with Brendan, I'm afraid. It's looking pretty bad.
Good morning, Judge Fox. My name is Mike Hollock, and I'm Teresa's younger brother. On October 31st, 2005, Brendan Dassey had the opportunity to choose a lifelong title for himself: rapist and murderer, or hero. It's such an easy decision that the fact that any person, young or old, who can choose the former has to be held accountable. He has consistently refused plea deals which would have made our lives easier amidst this tragedy, and to his benefit would have made his sentence shorter for doing so. Judge Fox, I will ask you to send this rapist and murderer to prison for the rest of his life without ever becoming eligible for parole. Thank you.
Guys, what do you think is going to happen if Brendan is exonerated and he indeed was not a murderer or a rapist? How is the Halbach family going to take that news that he had nothing to do with anything? It's going to be devastating.
There's just one thing that I wanted to say about this part, and that's it. These Brendan, like the Brendan story is always the most difficult thing for me to get through. And I was just having the sentiment that, like, I'd rather talk about blunt and bloody objects over this heart-wrenching stuff that goes on in the Brendan story. And that's all I can think of is how difficult this is to get through.
Well, I think that he is a pawn, and he was used as a pawn in Fallon and Krauss and Gahn's game to get Avery. They knew they had to have a link, and notice every time that something they run up against the wall and had to have something else would get created. The question must be asked for me again. This goes back to untangling and seeing how the process works. So here we have Brendan that admitted back at the 1st of November that he went over on October 31st. They had a cleanup. They went and gathered shit up out of the yard, and all that stuff. Yet Kratz does not do anything to Brendan for 5 fucking months because he didn't need him. Then all of a sudden, the settlement happens with Avery's case. Avery hires 2 powered attorneys. Man, then stuff starts falling out of the trees for him again. I'm just saying, Brendan is a pawn, and they found that out quickly. We covered the Jody Stokowski. They tried to get her, and basically she wouldn't fall for it. And she wasn't even there. And how hard they went at her. They went at her almost as hard, in some ways harder and worse. Everybody's heard the interviews of the things that they said to her. They were absolutely ridiculous. And she wasn't even there.
You make an excellent point. Here's the problem, and it's very, very simple. It's a terrible situation because Brendan was Stephen's alibi, right? If the state is saying that Teresa Halbach and her RAV4 had never left the property, there's a huge problem, right? So the state could have gone for 2 possible scenarios. One, not involving Brendan at all, and 2, one involving Brendan, right? So the simpler case would have been Stephen murdered Teresa Halbach without the knowledge or presence of Brendan Dassey. But the problem is that Brendan Dassey had implicated himself in both rape, torture, murder, shooting, and cremation. So now the state had to think, oh my God, how are we now going to factor this in the overall crime? Because forensically, none of it made sense. But you see, what Brendan now did is complicate the things for the state. Why? Because he said that Teresa Halbach was pinned up in Stephen's bedroom. The murder and shooting took place inside the trailer, the garage. So now we've got a problem. Forensically, there's no evidence of Teresa Halbach being in Stephen's trailer nor in the garage. And guess what? As Jack 61 alluded to, stuff started falling out of the tree. The key, right? The key in the bedroom. And then, of course, Ida Meffel. And then
That's right.
The hood latch to tie up Brendan.
See, they had to have Brendan in order to get that next search warrant, because they'd already been into the house and trailer, 6 or 7 times? 7 times, I think. So for a judge to say, oh, well, you can go back in again, they needed a whopper. And that's exactly what they got.
Correct. And I agree with you, Jack 61. He was a pawn in a chess game, in a sick chess game.
That's right.
Please identify yourself for the record.
My name's Barbara Tadek, and all I gotta say is my son did not do this. He was more or less coerced in saying what he said, and I believe that he should be maybe get a little bit for saying his story, but I don't think he ought to deserve life.
Anything else?
Just that he's innocent.
The court sentences you, Brendan Dassey, on the crime of first-degree intentional homicide to life in prison, and determines that you will be eligible for release to extended supervision on November 1st, 2048.
You could tell that kid is completely clueless. He's got no idea what just happened. And that look, that glance over his shoulder to see his mother, that does me in all the time. That goes to show he's probably thinking, what the hell just happened? It's just a shocking, shocking thing.
And I also have to add that I hold a lot of people accountable, and for Brendan's situation, starting with Candy Avery. She holds in my heart, my brain, much of the responsibility, because she's the one that contacted Fender over these IMs. I'm like Kel, I'd like to read the rest of them, whatever the hell they are. Maybe that'll change my mind, but then again, maybe it'll be worse. I don't know till we read them. But she's the one that started this ball rolling. And then ultimately, again, Brendan had already implicated himself in being over there and said that they had done this and that. And they didn't do anything for months. So then here we move along now. Moving further to Mr. Kaczynski, and he absolutely destroyed Brendan's case. Him and O'Kelly destroyed his case. And then here comes Frimgen and Edelston. They weren't really, I won't say they were horrible lawyers, but they weren't very good. There were some times in his case that they actually did a pretty damn good job and raised some really excellent points that I guess that really, to me, they just didn't care. They just didn't care. Avery had been convicted. Cops had already arrested Brendan in along with this. So, yeah, it's a done deal. The press conference, that absolutely destroyed his case as well, as far as the jury pool. And then, they tried, though, some various things, but it was too little too late. It was over. Absolutely, at the end of it, Fox had to know by the time the hearings rolled around in 2010, everything that happened in 2009 with O'Kelly and that scuzzy shit that he did, and then moving into the hearings in 2010, and he's still like he didn't correct these problems. He had to know that there were major problems, and he's just like, no.
This has got to be the most bizarre court case I have ever listened to in my life. Because you think about it from Brendan's perspective. He's sitting every day in court, and all these witnesses for the state come along, all these so-called experts. Every one of them talked about, oh, Stephen did this, Stephen did that, this happened, we found this. No one, fucking absolutely no one said, oh, by the way, we can associate this piece of forensic evidence with Brendan. Not once. So imagine sitting in the courtroom and your name is never called out once.
Or even Doc, even with alluding to what Weir tried, well, actually he did get away with it. Well, they had 5 days to clean up. Not one of them could even point to anything Brendan had touched to help clean up. Nothing.
Correct. And in court, the only thing they could do is play the interview, the interrogation with Fassbender and Wiegert, and I think 1 or 2 phone calls, which shouldn't have been allowed because his attorney was not present. So the entire case, this kid's in prison for life of the words that he said. Okay? So imagine if he decided to say, oh, well, by the way, I killed X, Y, Z, but you're never going to find out, etc., etc. Were the state now going to pin him on multiple murders without any form of forensic evidence at all? This, to me, is why the Brendan Dassey case is so hard, guys, because people, adults, have simply lost their marbles, their minds, and their right to reason and use logic and common sense. And that's why it's so devastating.
It's hard to lose family. I do feel bad for the Hallbucks. But you think they would want to know the truth. What really happened. I know I would want to get the real killer and give Teresa some peace.
Yeah, and give Teresa some peace. I think that's a really profound way for Barbara's words right there, actually. But we are getting to that point where we got to throw it over to Big Jeff for the wrap-up comments today. A lot of heavy into the Brendan case. We saw quite a bit in this little podcast today.
Well, this is another rough one to watch. You know, as was said already, whenever it involves Brendan, what was done to this kid is just unbelievable. There was nobody on his side, nobody competent on his side when it came to his defense, whether it was the people that were supposed to be working for him, Kaczynski and O'Kelly, all the way back to sort of the absenteeism of his own mother, who, according to her, was sort of duped into not going into that room in the first place. So there was really no consenting adult there. For consenting is a wrong word, but no sort of overlooking adult that was there for him, period, at all. And look what happened to him. It's shameful. And when you start to pile on some of the things like EDTA, it is just he didn't stand a chance. The laws of the country are now sort of working against him. And for those of us who believe he's innocent, he really is going to require some level of clemency from some higher order official. So it's tough where he is, but the best that we can do is continue to advocate for the wrongfulness of the conviction.
Thank you, Big Jeff. Those are some powerful words as well. Jack, if you wouldn't please.
This is this is tough. Every time we talk about running, we get enraged. I do. I get so angry. I've tried to scale that back and try to look at this more logically, but it still is really difficult knowing what we know and knowing what, again, I mentioned earlier about the players in the system and who they are, what their goals are, the biases that come into play. It's so enraging. And clearly, Kaczynski's not stupid in that capacity as far as, the moves that he made, what he tried to do. Him and O'Kelly tried to force Brennan into a plea deal, which was completely against what he wanted. Abandoning him to get coerced again on May 13th, 2006. Come on. These are not good people. These are not people that, this is my opinion. It doesn't reflect necessarily anyone else's here. But these people don't deserve to be in the system that helps, for good, bad, or indifferent for other people's lives. And this is exactly what he did for personal gain. And so did O'Kelly and other people as well. So it's a really powerful, really polarizing, I guess is the word I'm looking for, event in the case from start to finish, and still is to this very day. So, looking forward to keeping on destroying this and picking this apart. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Dr. Silkman.
Yes, I really want to say that I did not enjoy this episode at all, because it was very, very tough personally to go through and to hear just all the rubbish that went on, and the mere factor that, like I said, your own attorney and his investigator were basically working against their own client and were working for the state, right? They were handing over information, and they basically went in with the wrong idea. So it's pretty obvious that Kaczynski and O'Kelly had obviously thought that Stephen had murdered Teresa, and that Brendan was an accessory and he helped out. So they were basically trying to find an avenue and a way for Brendan not to spend the rest of his life in prison, right? Come up with a plea deal. But guys, at the end of the day, if you truly are innocent, I believe Brendan Dassey had absolutely nothing to do with anything. You have a right to defend yourself and do it properly. Again, guys, it was so hard to watch. And I know that there's going to be more heartbreak. But, excellent discussion. And I hope people on the panel and in chat enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Silkman. Absolutely. Kel, if you wouldn't lead us out of the episode.
I just want to basically echo what Dr. Silkman and everyone said. This has been a tough episode to go through again, taking it back, reliving and rewatching all Brendan's parts. It's just it's a tough one. Again, the fact that we covered a little bit of ground in terms of the law and just got a recap watching this episode on that. It just goes to show again how high this bar is that the state is now setting for Stephen and Brendan, all in the name of protecting their conviction. That's all I've got. I just wish the boys would be home already and this all could end, but I think we've still got a bit of a tough road and time ahead of us.
Thank you for those comments, Kel. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks a lot for coming along with us in chat, and everybody who have been watching and keeping up with our videos. So for Dr. Silkman and Kelly and Big Jeff and Jack, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.